Welcome back to Aisha Stories. We love having you here. Before we get started, please kindly subscribe and turn on the notification icon so we can bring you more amazing stories. It was the kind of evening that smelled like fried plantain and kerosene. The generator hummed in the background, tired but still holding on. Inside the house, Ngozi stood barefoot in the tiled kitchen, rinsing rice in a rusty sieve. She was only 19, barely understanding the weight of adulthood, but life had already handed her more than her share. The house was too quiet for this time of day. Madam had traveled for a burial in Umuahia 2 days ago. She wouldn't be back until Sunday. The children were with their grandmother. And Chief, well, Chief was never the type to sleep early. Ngozi felt his presence before she saw him. She froze at the sound of his slippers brushing the tiles. "Have you finished cooking?" he asked from behind her. His voice was calm, too calm. "Yes, sir. I was just about to dish your food." He came closer. She could smell the expensive cologne mixed with stale whiskey. She knew what was about to happen. It wasn't the first night. He touched her back, and her body tensed. She didn't want this. She never wanted any of it. But every time she tried to speak, her words choked her. What would she even say? That the man who paid her salary, who promised to send her to school, who gave her family bags of rice during Christmas, had been creeping into her room every night? Ngozi's father was a retired carpenter with 3 other mouths to feed. Her mother sold akara by the junction. This job, as awful as it had become, was all they had. And Chief knew it. He always knew. That night, he didn't go back to his room until past 2 a.m. The next morning, Ngozi stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Not anymore. She brushed her hair, tied her scarf, and stepped into the day like nothing happened. That was the thing about pain. It teaches you how to wear silence like a second skin. Weeks passed. The nights never changed. The routine stayed the same. Chief would call her to his room under the guise of needing hot water or a massage for his tired legs. Then he'd pull her close and whisper things that made her skin crawl. Until one morning, she woke up feeling sick. At first, she thought it was malaria. She took paracetamol, drank hot Lipton with ginger. But the nausea didn't stop. Her back started hurting. Her legs felt heavy. She knew. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She sneaked out to the pharmacy and bought a test kit. She waited till everyone left the house. Her hands trembled as she peed into the small container. She didn't need to wait the full time. The result was clear. 2 bold lines. She sat on the cold bathroom floor and stared at the tiles. When Chief found out, he was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He just gave her an envelope and said, "Take care of it." She opened it. The money was plenty, more than anything she'd ever held in her life. Ngozi stared at the bundle of notes and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the pregnancy or the ease with which he wanted to erase it. She didn't say a word. She just nodded. That night, while he snored in his room, she packed her things. She didn't take much. Just some clothes, her phone, and the envelope. She left the compound quietly, without turning back. The security man didn't even look at her twice. No one ever suspected the house help would just disappear. By morning, she was on a bus heading far from Lagos. She didn't know exactly where, but she knew she was never going back. Ngozi's hands were numb from gripping the bus window as the vehicle rattled away from the city she once called home. The noise of the engine was a steady hum, almost like a heartbeat, reminding her she was still alive even if part of her wanted to disappear. Outside, the scenery changed from cramped streets and tangled wires to open stretches of dusty earth and scattered houses with peeling paint. The smell in the air was different, cleaner, sharper, and somehow freer. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. The envelope with the money felt heavier than any burden she'd carried before. She was supposed to use it to erase the evidence of her mistake, but now it felt like a promise to something unknown, something bigger than fear. At the next stop, she slipped off the bus and found herself in a small town where the market was just waking up. Stalls were being set up, women carried baskets on their heads, and children ran barefoot between the sellers, their laughter filling the dusty air. Ngozi didn't join them. She walked slowly down the main street, clutching her bag close, wondering how she would survive here. She rented a tiny room from an old woman named Mama Nkechi who sold fried yam and pepper soup on the corner. The room was nothing more than 4 walls with a window that let in the morning sun and a mattress that smelled of mothballs, but it was safe. That was all Ngozi needed. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the weight inside her grew. She kept her secret close. Only Mama Nkechi knew she was expecting, and the old woman didn't ask questions. She just smiled and offered advice. "You carry that child like the sun carries the day," Mama Nkechi said one afternoon, handing Ngozi a warm cup of tea. "No one can take that light from you." Ngozi wasn't sure she believed that. Some nights, when the pain was sharp and the loneliness louder than any noise, she thought about giving up. But then she'd look at her swollen belly and remember that inside was someone who needed her strength. She started working at a small tailoring shop down the street. The owner, Chinedu, was kind but quiet. He didn't pry. He just gave her a place to learn stitches and seams and the art of making something beautiful from scraps. Ngozi found comfort in the rhythmic sound of the sewing machine, the way it pulled thread tight and made fabric come alive under her hands. As her due date neared, she found herself dreaming of a life far from the shadow of her past. She imagined a child who would never know fear or pain, a child who would rise above the mistakes of those who came before. The day her son was born, the sky was grey and heavy with rain. Ngozi named him Oena, meaning father's heart, because he was the part of her she wanted to protect most. Holding him in her arms, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet resolve. No matter what had happened, no matter what lay ahead, she would give Oena a life full of love and hope. The first months were hard. There were nights when Oena cried so much her fingers went numb, and days when she wondered if she had the strength to keep going. But with each smile, each tiny hand gripping hers, she found the courage to face another day. She taught herself to read books about business and success, saving every penny she could from her sewing. Mama Nkechi watched from a distance, proud of the woman Ngozi was becoming. Word began to spread about the tailor who worked late into the night, making clothes that seemed to carry a special kind of magic. People came from nearby villages just to buy her designs. With Oena strapped to her back, Ngozi stitched dreams into every seam. As the years passed, Oena grew curious and bright. He watched his mother with wide eyes, absorbing her stories and lessons. Ngozi never hid her past from him. Instead, she told him about the strength it took to survive, about how life could be hard but also beautiful if you fought for it. Oena loved numbers. He would count seeds at the market, add prices faster than anyone else, and ask endless questions about how money worked. Ngozi smiled and encouraged him. She knew her son was destined for more than their small town could hold. One afternoon, when Oena was 7, Ngozi sat him down under the shade of a mango tree. She looked into his eyes and said, "You can be anything you want, my son. But remember, true strength is not in what you have but in how you treat others." Oena nodded, gripping her hand tightly. That day marked a new chapter. Ngozi began teaching him about patience, resilience, and kindness. She saved enough money to send him to a school in the city, promising him a future brighter than any they had known. Though the city was vast and full of challenges, Oena never forgot where he came from. Every night, he called his mother to hear her voice, to remind himself of the warmth and love waiting at home. Ngozi watched her son grow with pride and hope. The boy who had come from pain was becoming a beacon of possibility. But life, as always, had more to teach them. Obena's first day at the city school was a whirlwind of sounds and faces that seemed to swallow him whole. The classrooms were bigger than any room he had seen before, the walls painted in bright colors that made his heart beat faster with both excitement and fear. He clutched his worn-out backpack tightly, feeling like a small boat in a vast ocean. Ngozi had packed his lunch herself, wrapping the food carefully in old newspaper. "Eat well," she told him before he left, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and worry. "Learn everything you can." Oena nodded, but as he walked through the school gates, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on his small shoulders. The other kids wore fancy shoes and talked about places he had never heard of. Some laughed at his clothes, which were neat but clearly second-hand. At first, Oena felt invisible. He didn't speak much, choosing instead to watch and listen. He noticed how the teachers had favorites, kids who smiled the brightest or came from wealthy families. He saw how some children were quick to judge and even quicker to exclude. But Oena had something else. A quiet fire inside that no one could see yet. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, he started to find his place. He was the fastest at math quizzes, the most curious during science lessons. When the teacher asked a question, his hand shot up before anyone else's. His voice was steady and clear, surprising those who had doubted him. One afternoon, during break time, Oena sat under a mango tree, flipping through a book he had borrowed from the school library. It was about famous inventors and entrepreneurs, people who had started with nothing but a dream and turned it into something huge. He imagined himself among them. He imagined a future where his name would be spoken with respect, where his mother's sacrifices would be rewarded beyond measure. Back in their small rented room, Ngozi waited anxiously for her son's return. She counted every minute, her heart jumping each time the door opened. When Oena walked in, tired but smiling, she hugged him tight. "How was your day?" she asked softly. "Good," he said, eyes shining. "I want to start a project. Something that can help people and make money too." Ngozi raised an eyebrow but smiled. "Tell me more." Obena's ideas poured out like a river breaking through a dam. He talked about solar energy, about powering homes without depending on expensive fuel. He spoke about the many people in their town who lived without electricity, how a simple invention could change their lives. Ngozi listened, amazed at his vision. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she also knew that Obena's dreams were bigger than any challenge. Weeks passed, and Oena spent every free moment sketching plans and talking to people who might help him. Ngozi sold more of her clothes at the market, saving every penny to buy materials for her son's project. One evening, as they sat outside their room watching the stars blink awake, Oena turned to his mother. "Do you think I can do it? Build something that matters?" Ngozi smiled, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You don't just think, Oena. You will. Because you have a heart that won't give up." The neighborhood began to notice the small boy with big ideas. People stopped to ask about his project. Some laughed, calling it impossible. Others offered advice or a helping hand. Ngozi felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride because her son was becoming a leader. Fear because the world was full of people like Chief, ready to tear dreams apart. But she kept those fears locked inside. She knew that to protect Oena, she had to be strong, stronger than ever before. One day, a man in a suit came to their door. He introduced himself as Mr. Ease, an investor interested in supporting young entrepreneurs. Ngozi was skeptical but listened as Oena explained his idea with confidence and passion. Mr. Ease nodded slowly, impressed by the boy's clarity. "I see promise here," he said. "With the right support, this could change lives." That night, Ngozi and Oena stayed up late, talking about the possibilities. The road was still long, but the first step had been taken. Obena's world was opening wide, and with his mother by his side, nothing seemed impossible. As the seasons changed, so did their fortunes. But the past still lingered in the shadows, waiting for its moment. The weeks after Mr. E's visit felt like the first breath of rain after a long dry season, full of promise and a quiet tension that made everything feel different. Ngozi watched Oena with new eyes, seeing the spark in his eyes burn brighter. She saw him waking before the sun, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, tinkering with bits of wire and plastic he'd collected from the market. The boy who had once sat silently under the mango tree was now chasing a dream with fierce determination. But the city wasn't kind. Every day brought challenges that threatened to swallow them whole. There were mornings when Obena's shoes were soaked from the rain, and evenings when their tiny room was cold because Ngozi couldn't afford kerosene for the lamp. There were whispers from neighbors, doubts cast like shadows, and the ever-present reminder of where they'd come from. One afternoon, as Ngozi prepared food for a small community meeting, she overheard voices outside their door. The house help who had replaced her at her old job was in town. They called her Epheima. She was laughing with a group of women, flashing the kind of smile that made Ngozi's heart freeze. Epheima had returned. Ngozi's hands trembled. She wondered if Epheima knew about Oena, if she remembered the money that Ngozi had taken and the choice she'd made to protect her child. That night, Ngozi couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, the sounds of the city filtering through the thin walls. Memories she'd buried so deep began to surface. The nights she had cried silently, the pain she had swallowed, the fear she had tried to forget. She didn't want Oena to know about the past. Not yet. She wanted him to be free. But the past has a way of catching up. Days later, Epheima came knocking at Ngozi's door. Her smile was soft, but there was a hardness in her eyes. She held a small baby in her arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in faded cloth. "Ngozi," she said quietly, "I want to talk." Ngozi hesitated but let her in. The two women sat on the dusty floor, the baby's soft cries filling the silence between them. Epheima told her story, how she had left with the money, how she had struggled to survive, how she had given birth to a son. She said she wanted to connect, to be part of Obena's life. Ngozi listened, her heart pounding. The pain and betrayal were still raw, but so was the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal. She looked at the baby Epheima held and saw a reflection of her own son. The children were twins, born from the same terrible beginning, but raised apart by fate and choices. Ngozi took a deep breath and said, "We have a future to build. Let's start there." Meanwhile, Obena's project was growing. With Mr. E's help, he had secured a small workshop where he could build his solar devices. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, fueled by a hunger that Ngozi recognized from her own youth. The first prototype was crude, a box with wires and bulbs that flickered to life under the sun's rays. But it worked. Obena's eyes shone with pride the first time he showed it to a group of village elders. Their nods and quiet murmurs of approval were the first signs that his dream could touch real lives. Ngozi began to sell more of her tailoring at markets beyond their town, reinvesting every bit she earned into Obena's dream. Their lives were a careful balance of hope and hardship. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Oena said, "Mother, when I'm rich, I will build schools and hospitals. I will make sure no child ever has to suffer like I did." Ngozi's eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand and held it tight. "You will, my son. And I will be here, every step of the way." But as the business grew, so did the eyes watching them. Some filled with envy, others with suspicion. There were whispers in the city about the tailor's son, the boy with big dreams. Not everyone wanted to see Oena rise. One morning, Ngozi found their workshop door smashed in, tools stolen, plans torn. The message was clear: someone wanted to stop them. Fear gripped her, but Obena's resolve only hardened. "We will rebuild," he said fiercely. "No one can stop this." And so, with hands bruised but spirits unbroken, they began again. The road ahead was long, filled with battles both seen and unseen. But Ngozi and Oena knew that every step forward was a step away from the shadows that once threatened to consume them. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet earth and burnt charcoal as Ngozi and Oena stood before the shattered remains of their workshop. The door lay broken, splintered and scattered across the dusty floor. Tools that had once been carefully arranged were nowhere to be found. Torn papers fluttered on the ground like fallen leaves. Ngozi's breath hitched. Her heart pounded not just with fear but with anger. The kind of anger that came from years of fighting for survival and still being pushed down. She looked at Oena, who stood tall despite the destruction. Who could do this? Ngozi whispered, her voice trembling. Oena knelt down and picked up a torn sheet from the floor. His eyes scanned the drawings and notes that had once been his roadmap. His fingers clenched into fists. "Someone wants to stop us," he said quietly. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." Ngozi wanted to cry, to scream, but instead she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "We'll rebuild," she said firmly. "We always do." That day, they walked back to their tiny home, the weight of the loss heavy but their spirits unbroken. The people in the neighborhood whispered, some offering sympathy, others casting wary glances. Word spread quickly. The young boy with big ideas was now a target. Ngozi found herself watching the street more closely. She noticed strangers loitering nearby, their faces unfamiliar and eyes sharp. She kept Oena close, fearing that their enemies might come for him next. Despite the danger, Oena refused to give up. Each morning, he rose with the sun and set out to find parts to replace what had been stolen. He spoke with shopkeepers, borrowed tools, and begged for scraps that could be fashioned into something new. Ngozi worked twice as hard, sewing late into the night, taking orders from markets miles away to raise enough money. One evening, as Ngozi stitched a vibrant Ankara dress, Oena sat nearby, piecing together a solar panel from old batteries and broken bulbs. Their small room buzzed with quiet energy, a fortress built from dreams and determination. Ngozi paused and looked at her son. "You remind me of the lion, Oena, strong and fierce." He smiled, but his eyes held the weight of 1,000 battles. As days passed, Oena's solar devices began to attract attention again. Villagers came by to see the little lamps that glowed warmly when the sun went down. People whispered about the boy who was bringing light to their dark homes. But with every success came new challenges. One afternoon, Ngozi received a call from Mema Nkechi. "Ngozi, you must come quickly. There's a problem with your landlord. They say you must pay rent or leave." Ngozi's stomach twisted. Rent was overdue because all their money was tied up in the workshop and school fees for Oena. She scrambled to find a solution, reaching out to friends, selling what little she had, and even pawning some of her sewing tools. The landlord was firm. No money, no stay. Oena saw his mother's worry and held her hand tightly. "We'll find a way, Mama. We always do." That night, Ngozi sat by the flickering lamp, thinking about the future. She remembered Chief's cruel words years ago, the nights she had endured in silence, and the child she had carried alone. Her hands trembled as she touched the locket she wore, a gift from her mother long ago. It was the only piece of her past she had kept close. She thought about Epheima and the baby she carried. The pain of their shared history was like a wound that never fully healed. But Ngozi was determined. She had come too far to let fear or poverty break her. Oena's schoolwork continued despite the chaos. He was the top of his class, the boy who asked questions no one else dared to. His teachers noticed his hunger for knowledge and began recommending scholarships and programs that could help him. One day, Oena received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to a youth innovation competition in Abuja. The prize was seed money to launch a business. Ngozi's eyes filled with tears. "This is your chance, Oena." He nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "I will make you proud." The competition was fierce. Young people from across the country showed their projects, apps, farming innovations, clean energy solutions. Oena's solar lamps stood out because they were simple, affordable, and built with heart. When the judges announced the winners, Oena's name was called. The applause was loud, filling the room with a promise of new beginnings. Ngozi stood at the back, clutching her shawl, tears streaming down her face. Her son was not just a boy from a broken home. He was a force to be reckoned with. With the prize money, Oena rented a new workshop, bigger and stronger. He hired a few young men from their neighborhood, teaching them how to build the solar devices. Ngozi expanded her tailoring business, sewing uniforms for schools and dresses for weddings. Together, they began building something that would last. But even as they rose, shadows of the past lurked close. One evening, a letter arrived with no name or return address. Inside, a single line written in sharp ink, "Remember where you came from." Ngozi read the words twice, her fingers shaking. She looked at Oena, who met her gaze with steady eyes. "We're not done yet," he said. "This is just the beginning." And so, their story unfolded, woven with struggle, hope, and the fierce love of a mother and son determined to change their destiny. Ngozi stood by the window, her eyes on the dim street as the wind brushed against the curtain. That letter hadn't left her mind. The handwriting, the message, too sharp to ignore. She turned it over again, reading the single line, "Remember where you came from." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even cruel. But it carried the kind of weight that gripped her chest tight. She had tried so hard to bury the past, to protect Oena from ever knowing the full truth about how he came into the world. But the past doesn't rot. It waits. Oena, now taller, his shoulders broader, and his face lined with quiet confidence, walked in just as she folded the note and slid it into the pages of her Bible. He noticed her silence immediately. "Mema, what's wrong?" Ngozi smiled too quickly. "Nothing, my son. Just tired." Oena looked at her a moment longer, then kissed her forehead. "Rest. Tomorrow's the investor meeting. I'll need you there." Ngozi nodded, but her mind had already drifted to the face she'd spent years trying not to see again. Chief Epheima. Back when she was just 17, wide-eyed and fresh from the village, she'd stepped into his home thinking she was lucky. A househelp job in the city was gold back then. What she didn't know was that behind the gold gate was a man who smelled like danger wrapped in cologne and power. He was her boss. Her nightmare. The man who crept into her room late at night with the arrogance of someone who thought consequences were for other people. He promised her things. He whispered lies in the dark. And when she got pregnant, he shoved an envelope of money into her hands like she was a mistake to erase. But Ngozi had run. Pregnant and alone, sleeping in markets and unfinished buildings, carrying a boy she'd sworn to protect with everything inside her. Now, that boy stood in front of her, organizing pitch decks, planning employment programs for young people, shaking hands with CEOs and looking like the man Chief Epheima could never be. Oena was light from darkness, and she wouldn't let anyone dim it. The investor meeting the next day was hosted in a modern hotel downtown. Oena wore a navy blue shirt, ironed so sharply you could see your reflection. He walked with purpose, flanked by two young men from his neighborhood, his first hires. He had insisted they be there. Ngozi wore a simple gown, clean and pressed, her scarf wrapped neatly around her hair. Her eyes followed every movement in the room, every new face. Then, her heart froze. There he was, Chief Epheima. Older now, with silver threads lining his hair and a gut that strained against his expensive agbada. But his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. Still calculating. Still cold. He sat among the other investors, hands clasped in his lap, listening as Oena began his presentation. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oena Ikena. I come from a neighborhood where light goes out more than it comes on, where children read under candlelight, and mothers burn kerosene they can't afford just to cook a meal. Today, I'm here not just with a solution, but with a mission." The room leaned in. Phones dropped. Laptops closed. Obena's words sliced through the air with clarity and conviction. He explained his solar project, how it could power homes, reduce costs, and create jobs. He didn't sound like a boy. He sounded like a leader. Chief Ifediora tilted his head slightly. Then his eyes flicked toward Ngozi. Recognition. He saw her. She stared back. No fear. No shame. Just a steady fire in her chest. He leaned toward the man beside him and whispered something. Then he stood, pretending to check his phone, and walked out of the hall without making a sound. Ngozi didn't move. Not even when her palms started to sweat. Not even when she saw the way Oena's eyes lit up with passion and pride. The past had seen them, but this time, it walked away. Weeks later, Oena's company, named Nurutech, officially launched. Investors lined up. Orders rolled in from schools, health centers, and entire communities. Oena hired more young people from underserved neighborhoods, training them not just to work, but to lead. He created what his mother once told him was rare in the world: opportunity with dignity. People called him the golden boy from nothing. But Oena always corrected them. I didn't come from nothing, he'd say. I came from a woman who gave me everything. Ngozi became known as Mema Nyuru. Every time her son gave a speech, he made sure she was right there beside him. She sat through interviews, sometimes answering softly, sometimes just smiling through tears. And then, one late evening as the city lights flickered below them from the tall office window, Oena asked, "Mama, who was my father?" Ngozi looked at him. The question had always been there, but he had waited 19 years to ask it. She took a long breath. He was a man who thought he could buy silence. But he gave me you instead. And that was the beginning of my life. Oena said nothing for a moment. Then he reached out and held her hand. That's all I need to know. Outside, rain started to fall lightly. But inside, mother and son sat in silence, together, unshaken, and rising. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance, low and heavy, as if the sky itself was clearing its throat to speak. Oena stood at the balcony of his newly opened Nurutech hub, a glass building that overlooked the neighborhood where he had grown up. The walls were clean, the lights solar-powered, and inside, over 50 young men and women were typing away, building the future one keystroke at a time. Ngozi watched him from a distance, her heart full. Every corner of this new space echoed with the years they had fought through hunger, shame, and loss. But this was no longer a dream. It was real. The next day was Oena's 21st birthday. An event had been planned, not by him, of course, but by his team. He didn't like noise, never had. But this wasn't just any party. This was a celebration of survival. His face had been on billboards across Lagos. News anchors called him Africa's youngest clean energy CEO. The government had even offered him a grant to build community power centers in the Northeast. But none of that changed who he was when he sat at the edge of his mother's bed at night, talking about how to install solar panels in schools for free. On the day of the celebration, people came in waves: politicians, CEOs, community leaders. Oena shook hands with all of them, but he never let go of his humility. His eyes kept searching the crowd for one face: Ngozi's. When she finally arrived, wrapped in a rich purple lace, Jill tall and firm, smile soft but proud, Oena rushed forward and took her hand. He led her to the center, and as the music dimmed, he raised the microphone. I was born out of pain, he began, voice calm but piercing. My mother gave birth to me in a backroom, with no doctor, no father beside her, and no one to hold her hand. She raised me by sewing until her fingers bled, by walking miles to get me into schools, and by never once letting me forget that I mattered. People were quiet now. Even the air listened. She taught me to walk like a man and to lead like someone who had nothing to prove. Everything I am, and everything this company is, started with a woman who said no to being silenced. He turned to Ngozi. I owe you my name, Mama. I owe you my life. The crowd burst into applause. Cameras flashed. But Ngozi only held her son's hand tighter. As people celebrated, in a black SUV parked a few streets away, Chief Ifediora sat with the windows rolled down halfway. He stared at the scene playing out through binoculars, lips thin, jaw clenched. His assistant shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Sir, should we do something?" He didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Here's my blood. Whether that woman likes it or not. But he doesn't know that. He will." That night, as the party faded and the crowd dispersed, Ngozi noticed a white envelope under the door of their home. It had no stamp, no name, just the words for Oena written in looping script. She picked it up and stood there, staring at it. Oena came out of the bathroom, towel draped around his neck. "What's that?" She hesitated, then handed it over. Oena opened it slowly. Inside was a black and white photo. A much younger Chief Ifediora, arms around a woman barely older than a girl, Ngozi. In her hand, she held a faint sonogram print. Behind the photo, a letter. Oena sat down, reading. His face didn't shift, but his hand trembled slightly. It read, "You don't know me, but I am your father. I've watched you grow into a man I could never be. I made choices that hurt your mother deeply. I won't make excuses. But I want to speak to you, just once, as your father. The man you are today carries my blood. If you're willing to meet, I will be at the Older Lako Rest House this Sunday by 4 p.m. Silence stretched between them. Ngozi couldn't find her voice. "I always wondered," Oena said quietly, eyes still on the letter. "But I told myself it didn't matter." "You don't owe him anything," she said. "He gave you nothing. Nothing but pain." Oena folded the letter neatly. "But I owe myself the truth," he replied. Sunday came with grey skies. Oena drove himself to the rest house. It was quiet, the building barely standing. A single table had been set under a tree. Chief Ifediora sat there, older, smaller than he looked in Obena's imagination. Oena walked slowly, each step weighed with questions. Chief stood as he approached. "You look like me," he said. "Oena Saturday." Silence again. Then, "Why now?" "I've watched you from a distance," Chief replied. "You grew into something I couldn't ignore. Something I couldn't destroy." "You tried," Oena said coldly. Chief nodded. "I was a coward. I was powerful, rich, feared, but never a man. Not like you." Obena's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here for your guilt," he said. "I came to see the man who thought a child could be erased with money. I wanted to see if he looked anything like me. He doesn't." Chief swallowed. His voice cracked. "You are more than I ever deserved." Oena stood. "I didn't need you to become who I am. But maybe you needed me to see who you're not." And with that, he walked away. Ngozi waited for him by the gate when he returned home. No words were exchanged. He just held her hand. They went inside. The light flicked on, solar-powered, silent and steady. Their past had knocked, and they had answered. But the future? That was something they were building, brick by honest brick. Rain tapped lightly against the window pane, not heavy enough to interrupt the quiet of the morning, but enough to make Oena pause and look out. The sky stretched grey across the horizon, low and moody. Behind him, the glow of his office screens reflected off polished surfaces. The city was waking up, unaware that today would mark a turning point not only in his life, but in the lives of millions. Ngozi stood by the kitchen, tying her scarf. She had insisted on cooking that morning, even though staff were always available. "Today, we're eating what our hands made," she said. Oena smiled. "Is that your way of keeping me humble?" She looked at him and raised one brow. "You've tasted real hunger. I don't need to remind you where you started." He nodded. "No, Mama. I never forgot." That day was the long-awaited opening of Obena's new initiative, Nuru City, a fully solar-powered technology and skill-building hub in the very area where he had grown up. Not in the rich parts of Lagos where investors lived, but deep within the heart of the neighborhood that raised him. The streets that once mocked him now wore signs that bore his name. The same boys who used to laugh when his mother picked old fabric from roadside trash to sew. Those boys now stood in branded City uniforms, organizing parking and escorting guests. A massive stage had been set. Not for show, but for change. And there, standing at the center of it, was Oena. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple shirt, dark jeans, and a look of unwavering purpose. When he took the mic, silence swept across the crowd. Cameras rolled. Reporters leaned forward. Even the wind seemed to hush. He began, "I was raised by a single woman who gave me everything she didn't have. My mother. Her name is Ngozi. She taught me that you don't need wealth to build something great. You need courage. You need memory." Applause broke out, but he raised one hand to pause them. "She used to tell me, don't let your beginning fool you. You were born into pain. Yes. But you can choose what comes next." And I did. He turned slightly, gesturing to the building behind him. City isn't just another project. It's a place where dreams will no longer die in the dark. Young girls will learn tech. Boys will learn how to build. Women will grow businesses. People will walk in with broken ideas and walk out with working systems. Ngozi watched, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. My story isn't a miracle. It's a reminder that the world doesn't always give us justice, but we can take our pain and plant it. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. And with time, it grows into power. Thunderous applause followed. After the speech, a soft voice called from behind the crowd. "Oena." He turned. Chief Ifediora. This time, without the agbada, without the weight of pride. Just a frail man in a plain shirt, holding a walking stick. Security noticed and began to move forward, but Oena raised his hand. They stopped. Chief stepped forward. "I didn't come to take credit. I didn't come for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I came to do what I should have done 21 years ago." He handed Oena a small, weathered file. Inside were papers, land titles, shares, documents transferring several properties to Obena's name. "This is yours. Not because I expect anything, but because I owe it." Oena didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just looked at the man who had tried to erase him before he was born, and now stood before him, hollowed by age and regret. "You owe her," Oena finally said. "You owe my mother." Chief turned to Ngozi, who stood unmoved. "I do," he said. "And I know I can't fix what I destroyed. But I see what you built. You raised a king." She said nothing, only nodded, and turned away. That was all. Months passed. City spread to other cities, Kano, Enugu, Port Harcourt. Children who had never touched a computer now coded in Python. Mothers who once sold akara on the roadside now ran online businesses with national reach. And through it all, Oena stayed close to his roots. He refused to move to Banana Island, even when he could afford 10 houses there. Instead, he bought the land where he and his mother used to sleep in a wooden kiosk, built a school there, and named it the Ngozi Academy. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Oena walked into his mother's room. She was older now, but her eyes were still sharp. "Mama," he said, "do you remember when we didn't have enough to buy Gary?" She laughed. "I remember. You used to add more water to make it feel like it was plenty." "I'm thinking of writing a book," he said. "Not about success. About surviving." Ngozi looked at him, warmth filling her eyes. "You survived, my son. And then you built something no one could burn." They sat together, watching the light fade. Quiet. Whole. Because some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with peace. They end with truth. And sometimes, they end with a woman who refused to stay broken, and a son who rose from her strength. Moral of the story: your beginning does not define your destiny. A child born from betrayal and abandonment can still rise above shame and become a light to the world. A woman rejected, humiliated, and left alone can still raise greatness with her bare hands. Love, sacrifice, and resilience have the power to break generational cycles of pain. This story reminds us that no matter how deep the wound, healing and purpose are possible. That power, real power, isn't inherited. It is built, often in silence, through struggle, grit, and unshakable love. Thanks for watching Aisha Story Lovers. Kindly let us know the country you are watching from and what your time says right now. We love you.